This story took place in France when I was still in middle school about 5 years ago. I was 14 years old and had decided to invite all of my friends from my class for a sleepover during the weekend. My school used to be a boarding school, meaning that some of my friends couldn't come because of them angering the housekeepers in the school, and since your parents weren't there to make decisions for you, those old, nasty, and severe adults got to do them for you. Because of that, way fewer people managed to come to the party. Only 4 out of 7 invited could come, which only left us 5 in total. So the night of the sleepover has come, and after school, everyone has gathered up to my house. Well, not really my house. My parents used to work for this moving agency, and they bought out the house next to ours in case people wanted to rent it out for a few days. So, since my parents reputed that 14 was a responsible age to be left alone in a house with 4 other teens, we all agreed that they would leave us the house for the entire sleepover and that they would just come and check us out every once in a while to make sure nothing shady was going on. We all had a bunch of fun and ate some pizza while we played truth or dare before going to sleep at an unhealthy time of the night. Luckily enough, there was enough space to fit us all in the main bedroom of the house. All of my friends went to sleep and I stayed up on my phone. I was more of the night owl of the group and enjoyed staying up at night. It was around 2 in the morning when I started hearing weird creaking sounds coming from downstairs. I think some other sounds were made before them, but I was too focused on my phone to notice. Before I keep going with the story, I have to describe the house a minute because it's essential to understand how the story goes down next. It's a pretty old, classic cottage. It's at least 70 years old and has never been rebuilt, and just repaired if necessary. The master bedroom is located on the 2nd floor of the house, which isn't really a floor, more of a long hallway with no walls and rooms attached to it. So imagine you walk in a house through a front door into the kitchen, then move on to a bigger dining area with ton of space directly attached to the living room, with the second entrance to the house, a long sliding glass door, and then there are the stairs. Once you get up these stairs, you are onto this hallway-like balcony with no walls. At one end there is the master bedroom, and at the other, just a few rooms with another bathroom. Back to the story. I started hearing these loud, creaking sounds, but just blamed it on the house being old. It was mainly made out of wood, so there is no doubt that every once in a while it creaks on its own. And, to be honest, I'm pretty used to it. That was until I started hearing this noise very frequently, and I remembered that the stairs are also made of wood. They made this horrid sound every time someone tried to go on them. And then I heard it. The familiar sound that was the very last step of the wooden stairs made once it was stepped on. I could recognize it due to it creaking louder than the other stairs, and also because the sound is extremely distinguishable. I thought it was just my parents checking in on us to make sure we were sleeping, so I quickly hid my phone and pretended to be asleep. But I quickly heard the same creaking noises getting further away from our door, which meant that whoever was on the stairs wasn't going back down them again. Otherwise, the louder noise would have repeated itself. Therefore, they were going to the other side of the balcony. But the issue was that my parents knew the house better than me, which meant they would have known that there was nothing but empty rooms and a bathroom at the end. I started freaking out a bit. Deep down, I was almost certain it was one of my parents, but I couldn't get over the fact that they came in the house all of a sudden and that whoever it was, they were heading towards nothing. I quickly jumped off the bed, not to make any noise, and quickly opened the door, just enough to peek through the opening. There, at the end of the hallway, was an extremely tall man. That was enough to tell me it could not have been one of my parents. I am 5'3" and my dad is 5'8" and my mom is my height. I shut the door quietly despite the sudden wave of panic rushing over me, and I went to wake up one of my friends and told him to come with me in the bathroom that was attached to the room. By the way that they reacted fast and without complaining, I could tell that I sounded genuinely terrified. We all went and hid in the bathroom. I got one of my friends to tell my parents about our current state so that they could call the police for us, while me and my other friends barricaded the door. We all went and hid in the big cabinet underneath the 2 sinks that were in the attached bathroom. My parents responded fast and I just started hearing the footsteps getting louder and louder. One of my friends was crying and she frantically started texting her parents about the break-in. The footsteps started coming inside the room next to ours, and I slammed my hand in front of my crying friend's mouth in order to make less noise. And that's when we heard the sound of the front door slamming open and a bunch of people running in shouting, "Police!" We waited until they found the man before coming out of the bathroom. The man had managed to get in through the sliding door that was open just barely for us to not notice, but just enough for someone to open the rest of the way. The person was arrested, and on him was a piece of fabric, rope, and the gun. God knows what would have happened if he had found my friends and I. All of our parents were informed and we were safe. Let's just say none of my friends and I slept in that house again. I was 14 when this happened, and I had a friend, Kathy, who I've known for 4 years. She was 5 years older than me, so she was 19. Despite the large age gap between us, we were really close and told each other pretty much everything. She used to be my neighbor, and that's how we met, but eventually moved out of town and then moved back, but this time living with her grandparents, making her living further away. We haven't seen each other for some time, so because of that, she invites me over to spend the night with her so we can catch up with each other's lives and whatnot. I walked to her house. Again, it was a bit further this time, but I had no trouble as the sun was still out. I get there and she greets me. We give each other a big hug as we really missed each other. We spent the next few hours catching up with each other's lives. As it got dark, her grandparents finally went to bed and we were alone in the living room. Now that we were alone and the house was quiet, Kathy then tells me that she wanted to hang out a bit with a friend who lives nearby. I wasn't expecting to hang out with someone else, but hey, maybe I can make a new friend. Though I am a bit shy with strangers, but a friend of Kathy is a friend of mine, I suppose. As we start walking together, I started to get uncomfortable as we had homeless people coming up to us asking to come back with them, and older men catcalling us from their front porch saying all sorts of pervy comments. But with Kathy next to me, I knew that she would protect me. Anyways, we finally made it to her friend's house and her friend opens the door. It's a guy whose name is Taylor and 20 years old. He invites us into his small apartment and we just sit around and hang out. They were both talking, mostly while I was just sitting there, bored. I didn't really have much to do, and this was back in 2013 before I had any sort of smartphone. I still had a flip phone, so really, I had nothing to use to entertain myself. Later, as Taylor goes to the bathroom, I tell Kathy I'm getting bored, and she says not to worry, we're going back to her house in a bit. When Taylor got back out, he tries to convince us to stay and sleep at his place for the night. Kathy immediately looks at me and turns back to him and says okay. I was upset because the plan was to sleep over at her place and for it to be the both of us only. Not only that, she didn't even let me voice my opinion about how uncomfortable I am about this. She convinces me to stay, but this guy was a total creep. I learned that he wasn't just some friend, he was someone of her interest. But what makes it even worse were his comments. He would constantly say how cute I am, how adorable my lips were, and would constantly talk about my feet. I was really uncomfortable, but I knew Kathy wouldn't let this guy hurt me. I just ignored him the best I could. I was still trying to find ways to get out of here. I was scared to call my dad to pick me up because I didn't want him to find out I was at some random dude's house and it was too late outside to walk somewhere else for him to pick me up. I was stuck here. Eventually we go to his room, lay down on his shitty waterbed and start watching some random cheap horror film. I'm trying my best to not fall asleep because I'm uncomfortable and I just simply didn't want to sleep, but I get tired since it was late, so I pass out. Later, I woke up for some reason and see that both Taylor and Kathy are awake. She tells me in a soft voice to shush and go back to sleep. I couldn't really tell if I was awake or dreaming, but I closed my eyes and went back to bed. The next morning, I have Kathy walk me home. I was pretty upset for making us stay there, so the walk was pretty quiet and awkward. Anyways, weeks later, my brother, who is actually friends with Taylor, told me that he was bragging and that him and Kathy, were having intercourse on their bed while I was asleep. And needless to say, I was extremely disgusted. I've even seen Taylor after that night, either around town or on school grounds. We would even make eye contact sometimes, and he would give me a smile and a wink. In 2002, when I was 13, I went to go on a sleepover at my cousin's house. I would go sleep over at his house as many times as possible since his parents were pretty careless, which meant that we could do almost anything we wanted to. We just stay up late and eat a lot of candy that his parents had bought for him. This was about 7 p.m. My dad drops me off at his house and we go in, and things were pretty normal as usual. We stayed in the living room as his mom was in her room with the door closed and his dad was gone because he worked that night. So we continued to have our fun up until 2 in the morning. We were getting tired and I started to feel slightly sick as I had way too much candy. My cousin had knocked out already. We were watching TV and I heard him breathing heavily. Seeing that he was asleep, I might as well do the same and hope that I would be able to sleep through this stomach ache. So there we were, laying on the ground with just one blanket over us in the dark. I was facing directly where you could see the entrance to the kitchen. I could somewhat see a figure standing at the step of the kitchen entrance. They had like this little nightlight in the kitchen, so I can tell this figure was a woman, a very old woman. I couldn't make out the details of their face or what they were wearing, but I just knew it was some older woman. Just like anyone else, you would think I'd be scared, but to be honest, I felt quite comfortable. I can't explain it, but it felt as comforting as when my mom used to hold me as a kid whenever I was upset or injured. So I kept staring at it until I finally was able to fall asleep. The next morning, my dad picks me up and we start to head back home. I didn't tell anything to my cousin about it as he's the type of person to call me crazy or simply make fun of me over this, so I was better off staying quiet about it. Plus, I thought all the candy made me hallucinate. However, what I learned next is what gives me goosebumps and forever leaves me living with regret. My father seemed unusual, so I ask if something is wrong. He then tells me that yesterday morning, my grandma called him asking if he could bring me to her house for a visit, but because he knew I was going to go to a sleepover at my cousin's, he said no. She kept begging and begging, but he kept saying no and eventually hung up on her. Well, turns out yesterday, at 6 p.m. to be precise, an hour before I headed to my cousin's house, my grandma, aka the person who helped my father raise me, passed away. My father now understands why she kept begging him to bring me over to her place. My grandma would always make my favorite chocolate chip cookies whenever I came over. She must have known that her time was coming up and was trying to get to see me one last time. Well, I guess she did. I know for a fact that it was her who I saw at my cousin's house last night. I was stunned pretty badly that she knew her time was coming to an end and that she came to see me one last time.